Close your eyes for a second. Picture 65 men on one wooden ship spending 3 weeks at sea. There is no toilet, there is no drain, there is no soap, and there is absolutely no privacy. There is just freezing salt spray, wet wool, and the heavy smell of men who have been rowing since dawn. Every single surface is damp. Every breath carries sweat and brine. The deck is barely wider than a modern pickup truck, and these men eat, sleep, bleed, and relieve themselves within arm's reach of each other for weeks on end. By every established law of modern medicine, this ship should be a floating coffin. Cholera, dysentery, typhus, pick your poison. All it should take is one contaminated hand or one shared water barrel, and the whole crew goes down within days. But here's what actually happened. They did not get sick, not in any numbers that mattered. These men reached Iceland. They colonized Greenland. They touched North America 5 centuries before Columbus. And the real surprise is not just what they did on that ship. It is what happened when you compare them to the most advanced civilization in medieval Europe. A civilization that had toilets, surgeons, and sanitation laws, and still lost millions. Fast forward to the 12th century, the age of the Crusades. Thousands of European soldiers were packed into transport ships bound for the Holy Land. These were the largest naval operations medieval Europe had ever mounted. They featured enclosed decks, minimal ventilation, and shared water drawn from wooden barrels stored in the dark below those decks. Dysentery and typhus spread faster than any enemy army ever could. Men who had survived brutal siege warfare and open battle never even made it to shore. Disease claimed them below deck before they ever saw the enemy. During the Third Crusade, disease losses aboard ships vastly exceeded battlefield casualties. And this problem was never truly solved. 800 years later, the HMS Thunderer, a fully equipped Royal Navy warship with surgeons, sanitation regulations, and purpose-built toilets, lost 43 men to cholera in just 2 weeks. Now, rewind further. Go back to the 9th century and picture a Viking longship. 30 meters long, 2.7 meters wide. That is roughly 2 men per meter of deck space. 60 oarsmen are working in shifts, sleeping right between the rowing benches, eating cold provisions while North Sea spray soaks through their cloaks. There is no surgeon, there is no sick berth. There are no regulations, no toilets, no waste chutes, nothing. When storms hit, there was no going below deck because there was no deck below. Hands wet with sweat and seawater gripped the same oars minutes apart. Food passed from fingers that had not seen fresh water in days. Men huddled together for warmth, breathing the exact same damp air in a space tighter than a modern prison cell. Anyone who has served on a ship, military or commercial, understands this arithmetic. Tight quarters, shared surfaces, and limited water mean that when one person gets sick, it moves through a crew like fire through dry timber. And yet, year after year, decade after decade, Viking fleets launched, raided, traded, and came home. There were no mass outbreaks. There were no fleet-killing epidemics. Operational capability was maintained across 3 entire centuries of maritime dominance. Medieval fleets with enclosed decks and formal infrastructure bred disease. Viking longships with no infrastructure at all did not. They sailed the same ocean, faced the same bacteria, but had completely different outcomes. So what exactly did the Vikings know that medieval Europe never figured out? Before we get into their genius system, we have to deal with the myth. Hollywood gave us a very specific image. Filthy, blood-spattered raiders with matted hair and rotten teeth. Men who looked like they had not bathed since birth. But the archaeological record tells a completely different story. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who encountered Norse traders on the Volga River around the year 921, documented something that clearly surprised him. These Northmen washed every single day. Every day they washed in shared bowls of water passed from man to man. 3 centuries later, the English chronicler John of Wallingford recorded his own bitter complaint about Viking settlers in England. He wrote that they combed their hair daily, they bathed every Saturday, and they changed their clothes regularly. His grievance had absolutely nothing to do with violence or raiding. He was upset because Viking hygiene was making them far too attractive to English women. The greatest threat the Norse posed to England, according to at least one medieval chronicler, was not their axes, it was their grooming standards. And the graves confirm it. Across Scandinavia, Britain, and Iceland, Viking burial sites consistently contained the exact same personal items. Bone combs, often ornately carved. Tweezers, small ear spoons made from antler. Complete grooming kits were buried alongside deadly weapons and tools, as though personal hygiene held the exact same importance as readiness for battle. These were not the burial goods of unwashed barbarians. These were the prized possessions of people who considered cleanliness a core matter of their identity. Now the question becomes sharper. How did a civilization this committed to hygiene manage to uphold those high standards on vessels with absolutely zero sanitation infrastructure? The answer is not one single solution. It is a system. And every layer of that system was more deliberate than it appears. Start with the ship itself. Archaeologists have excavated Viking vessels for over a century, and across every excavation, every scan, and every cataloged artifact, they find the exact same absence. No chamber pots, no latrines, no designated waste areas, nothing. Viking shipbuilders made ruthless design choices. Every single element served speed, flexibility, or survival. Anything that did not earn its place was left on shore. Sanitation infrastructure fell into that category. Not because the Norse were indifferent to waste, but because the ship's design naturally solved the problem. Here is the underlying principle. A longship's freeboard, which is the distance from the waterline to the deck's edge, was roughly half a meter. Stand at the bow, hold the stem post, and the churning ocean is right there. You could trail your fingers in it without leaning. Human waste went straight overboard. Immediately. Nothing accumulated, nothing festered. Moving saltwater diluted dangerous pathogens within seconds. In calm weather, it was effortless. In rough seas, simple wooden buckets served as temporary containers, emptied at the first safe moment. Waste was never stored and never allowed to sit. But here's the brilliant detail that separates this from a crude workaround. The hull itself was an active part of the sanitation system. Clinker-built planks, which overlapped and were riveted and sealed with tarred animal hair, were never perfectly watertight. Seawater seeped in constantly. Crews bailed the bilge daily as a matter of routine. Any organic debris, food scraps, spillage, or accidental contamination instantly mixed with that incoming seawater and was bailed overboard within hours. There were no stagnant pools. There were no anaerobic pockets where bacteria thrive. It was a constant, natural flush. Now compare that to a medieval Crusader transport. Enclosed cargo holds, deep bilges sealed below deck, inaccessible except through heavy hatches. Waste accumulated in standing water for weeks on end. Those bilges became toxic cesspools. Bilge fever, which was essentially sepsis from decomposing organic material sitting in stagnant seawater, devastated crews well into the 19th century. The Viking ship was open, leaking, and continuously flushed by the ocean. The medieval ship was sealed, stagnant, and completely lethal. And then there was the drinking water. Fresh water stored in wooden barrels turns deadly within weeks. Bacteria multiply rapidly in the dark. E. coli breeds deep in the grain of the wood. Later navies learned to fear the water barrel just as much as enemy cannon fire. But the Vikings completely bypassed this. They carried weak beer, which was accidentally pasteurized through the brewing process, and fermented sour milk instead of fresh water. Both lasted much longer on long voyages and happened to naturally suppress the bacteria that made stored water lethal. They chose it for the taste and the shelf life, but they got survival as a massive bonus. But the ship was only half the equation. Viking crews did not stay at sea indefinitely. Over 200 documented harbor sites have been identified from Norway to Newfoundland. This was a massive network of reset points, roughly a day's sailing apart. Every time a ship was beached, it was a sanitation reset. Men went ashore. Waste dispersed into the soil. Clothes were fiercely scrubbed in fast-moving streams. Bodies were washed with sand and freezing cold water. The biological burden of shipboard life simply vanished into the landscape. But the real genius was not in the harbors. It was in what the Norse did with their time on land. And this is where the gap between Viking and medieval Europe becomes a massive gulf. The word laugardagur, washing day, is the Old Norse root of Saturday in modern Scandinavian languages. Every seventh day, without exception, Vikings bathed. It was not treated as a luxury. It was a strict cultural obligation. In the freezing winter, this meant heating scarce firewood. During voyages, it meant cold seawater scrubbing at the first sight of landfall. The schedule held completely regardless of the conditions. Daily combing was equally non-negotiable. Those ornate bone combs found in the graves were not mere vanity items. They were vital medical tools. The bacterium that causes epidemic typhus spreads through lice feces entering scratched skin. Medieval armies routinely lost more soldiers to typhus than to actual combat. But daily combing physically removed adult lice before they could ever lay their eggs. Weekly bathing violently disrupted the parasite's entire reproductive cycle. What comes next is the part of the story that rarely gets told. The difference between Viking hygiene and medieval European hygiene was not about knowledge or advanced technology. It was about something far more powerful. The Coppergate excavation in York, the old Viking settlement of Jorvik, uncovered something remarkable. Viking-era homes had pit latrines, simple holes in the ground with wooden seating platforms screened by partitions. It was basic, yes, but highly functional. Waste was contained. Disposal was entirely deliberate. But the most famous piece of evidence from Viking York is not a bone comb or a latrine. It is something far less dignified. The Lloyds Bank coprolite. Found in 1972, it is a fossilized, 20-centimeter-long piece of 9th century Viking waste. Analysis revealed intestinal parasite eggs inside it. This is absolute proof that Vikings were not magically immune to infection, but they managed it. They contained it. They kept it from cascading into a city-wide epidemic. Now picture yourself walking through medieval London or Paris during the exact same centuries. Chamber pots were casually emptied from upper windows directly into the street below. People shouted warnings before dumping, and pedestrians simply had to learn to listen and dodge. Open sewers ran alongside busy market stalls. Butchers dumped animal waste into the very same streams that supplied the city's drinking water downstream. Lice infested nobles and peasants alike. Even kings scratched constantly. And here's what made the existential difference. Medieval Europe genuinely believed that bathing was dangerous. This was not a minority view. This was mainstream medical opinion. The prevailing theory held that warm water opened the pores, allowing deadly disease to enter the body. People were actively discouraged from washing themselves. In the same century, on the exact same continent, the Norse are bathing every Saturday by cultural mandate, while medieval Europeans are avoiding water because their top physicians told them it would kill them. The Viking hygiene system did not depend on a single brilliant innovation. It worked because every element reinforced every other element, and the enforcement mechanism was the most elegant part of all. There were no laws, there were no health inspectors, there was no bureaucracy, there was just shame. On a longship carrying 65 men, a man's reputation was his survival currency. Showing up unwashed, unkempt, and crawling with lice was not seen as a private failing. It was a direct physical threat to every other man aboard. Social pressure enforced compliance far more effectively than any written regulation ever could. Each crew member became a node in a distributed defense network. One man's discipline protected the entire group. One man's neglect endangered absolutely everyone. Medieval Europe took the exact opposite approach. Hygiene was treated as a matter of individual choice when it was even considered at all. Cities grew far faster than their sanitation systems could follow. Waste management was a municipal problem that no municipality actually solved. And the brutal consequences finally arrived in 1347. The Black Death. The plague bacterium, carried by fleas, hosted by rats, thrived in exactly the dense, filthy conditions that medieval cities had spent centuries building. Open sewers, contaminated wells, streets shared closely by humans and livestock. Between 1347 and 1353, the plague killed an estimated 50 million people. Entire villages disappeared. Labor markets collapsed. Social structures that had stood firm for centuries fractured in mere months. The medieval world did not lack intelligence. They were not fools. King Edward III ordered London streets to be cleaned. Italian city-states practically invented the quarantine, holding ships offshore for 40 days before allowing crews to disembark. These were genuine, thoughtful responses to a horrifying crisis they did not fully understand. But they were reactive, emergency measures applied long after the catastrophe had already struck. The Norse system was fundamentally preventive. It was woven directly into the fabric of daily life, so deeply that it required no emergency response at all. The combing happened long before the lice could spread. The bathing happened before the infection could take hold. The waste went overboard before it could ever accumulate. Two civilizations faced the exact same biological enemies, the same parasites, the same bacteria, the same transmission pathways. One embedded hygiene directly into its culture. The other left it completely to chance. And the results speak loudly across 1,000 years of history. Picture a Viking harbor camp at dawn. A fire is burning. Steam rises from a simple wooden basin. A man kneels beside it, cups cold water in his hands, and presses it firmly against his face. He draws a bone comb through his beard with the slow, automatic precision of someone performing a task he has done 10,000 times. A fresh linen cloth wipes his forearms. Clean wool garments replace the salt-stiffened ones from the long voyage. The Vikings had no germ theory. They could not scientifically explain why their system worked. But generations of careful observation, seamlessly encoded into daily ritual, produced a public health system that massively outperformed civilizations with grand libraries and royal physicians. Step back from the historical details for just a moment. Two worlds, same era, same mortal stakes. One built a culture where hygiene was identity, where a man's comb was buried alongside his sword, where 65 men on an open boat enforced each other's discipline through shared understanding. The other built massive cathedrals and universities and complex legal codes, but left basic hygiene to individual preference. And when the plague finally came, it found a continent perfectly prepared to receive it. The difference was never about having better technology. It was about systems thinking. It was a civilization that deeply understood that survival is a culture, not a technology. The knowledge they carried quietly in their hands ultimately outlasted every empire that forgot it.